Yes, hello everybody and welcome back. And I hope you've had a terrific lunch break. It's been lovely sitting outside here at the La Trobe campus in Wodonga, having a chat and a catch up about what happened this morning. And we're all really excited about this afternoon. Wonderful two panels, and great thanks to the people who are going to be on those panels and have stepped forth to participate in this convention. So the obvious starting point, we felt, was to answer the question that's asked by so many people, and we've heard in Indi so many times, why have an independent member of parliament? What can they really do? And so the question we're going to address this afternoon is, why bother? Why did these terrific three women who we're going to speak to actually decide that it was worth the effort that we know that goes into being elected, and then to find themselves in this peculiar position, really, in our electoral parliamentary system of being an independent member of parliament? So our panel this afternoon for the first session is three independent members of parliament. Firstly, we're going to hear from Susannah Sheed. She's the independent member for the Shepparton district in the Victorian Legislative Assembly. She has secured millions of dollars for her electorate, including $356 million to upgrade the Shepparton Trail line. If only we had that up here. 170 million for the Goulburn Valley Health, the big hospital complex there, and 10 million for the Shepparton bypass route. Another 10 million for the new Shepparton Arts Museum, and we're all a bit green about that too, plus 21 million for the Shepparton Education Plan. That is just an incredible amount of resources that are flowing into her electorate. Secondly, we're going to hear from Rebecca Sharkey, who's the federal member for Mayo and a member of the Centre Alliance. So Rebecca sits on the crossbench and has been there with Kathy and now there with Helen. She's a champion for all the issues that are impacting on rural and regional communities. And as we all know, a strong voice on justice around social security, education, aged care, and for young people and refugees. And then when Zali gets to join us, she will be inviting her happily, as she, I think, struggles through Sydney traffic at the moment. But Zali is the federal independent member for Warringah, as we all know. She's made her mark in Parliament already, and the country across, everybody across the country knows who Zali is. She's currently challenging the government on its lack of climate change policy by introducing the People's Climate Change Bill in 2020. So we have much to thank her for. What an exciting group of women to join this panel and for this discussion about why bother. So we're going to talk about the meaning and the value of having and being an independent politician, a community politician, and what it means for our democracy. I'm going to ask each panel member to speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have some time to answer the questions that are coming into the chat room from the participants at this conference. Please don't forget to put a queue in front of your questions so that we can find them easily. And I'm going to hand over now to Susannah Sheed, who's joining us from Shepparton. Hi, Susannah.
Okay, I'm now off mute. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm here in Yorta Yorta country, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I'm situated today and pay my respects to their elders. It's a challenging topic. Why bother? I think probably starting out for me, a little bit of background. I came from a farming family in the Riverina, went to boarding school and university in Melbourne, and had spent 35 years as a lawyer in this district that I'm now living in, the Shepparton district. And I was actively working as a lawyer, an independent children's lawyer, family law, and involved in lots of organisations. And so I felt very attached to this community, and where I came from wasn't very far away either. So for years, I was one of those people who sat around and said, you know, things like, oh, the parties, you know, they're not representing us, we get no investment in our region, so many of those sort of negative things. And So in October 2014, I was sitting in my office and I was flicking through the paper in the coffee room and looking at the election campaign in the state of Victoria that was underway. And ministers were going everywhere and announcements were made everywhere for huge investments in Bendigo, Ballarat, Geelong, and of course, Melbourne. And it just struck me as so unfair. And I suppose I was at a point where my frustration was great, and I knew other people felt that way because, as I say, we'd been talking about it for years. And I approached a couple of people and said, what about we run an independent this time? And, you know, I'd be prepared to have a go. I would say within 3 days, we had 10 people. Within a few days after that, we had a team. And in 29 days, we won it. It was an extraordinary campaign, really short, sharp, unexpected. And people said it was the upset of that state election. So it has been an amazing journey. And I have to say, I didn't expect to win. Like Indi, we wanted to make the seat marginal. We'd had 47 years of the National Party. It was a safe seat, and we'd been truly underdone for a very long time and felt unrepresented. So that was the space that I was filling, and clearly a whole lot of people from, you know, all sides were prepared to shift their vote to vote for an independent in that election. And I might say even more did it in the second election. So that was very heartening too. So I think it's been a very successful journey for me in a lot of ways. We in our electorate didn't have time to do the Indi way. It was just short, sharp, bang. And my campaign was stand up Shepparton, it's our turn. And I wanted money for trains. I wanted money for education. I wanted money for the Shepparton bypass, for our hospital, which had been having master plan after master plan for years. And just before the election happened, the Libs and the Nats came in and offered 70 million, but we really needed 250 million, and that's what we ultimately got, which was just for the first stage. So there'd been a lot of needs expressed in the community, and really my first term was very much about the money, getting the investment, getting some of the things we needed, which is possibly a bit different to that federal scene that we look at. So in those first few years, and even up now, it's my 7 years I've been now in, this is my 7th year, and we've had amazing investment. Most of those figures you read out, Alana, are out of date. They're much higher than that, and we've nearly hit the $1 billion mark. So we've had extraordinary investment. And I think you've got to acknowledge that that's a reflection of what we didn't have for such a long time. So we've had a government that I've been able to work with. And I would say that I would work with any government, just as Kathy does. But that has been a really important feature of being able to achieve what we wanted to achieve in the community. So it was pretty frightening in those first couple of weeks. And I've heard Helen and Kathy say, what the hell, what have I done? And really when I went to, meet Daniel Andrews for the first time on my own, I drove to Melbourne on my own. I met him on my own and I walked away on my own. And that was sort of that, you get that phone call when you're an independent to come and meet the Premier. It was, I was the only independent in the Victorian Parliament to start with in those 4 years. So there was a lot of aloneness. So, but overall, I feel like it's been successful, but there are many challenges, and perhaps I'll just move on to some of the challenges. One of the biggest ones I found that perhaps I hadn't thought through was that I had to make all the decisions. Everyone else has a party to tell them what to do. And I would sometimes walk into Parliament if there'd been a quick procedural issue and the bells had rung and say, oh, what's the vote about? And most people didn't know. They just had their whips to get up and say yes or no. I have to say the clerks of the Parliament were great and always assisted when you needed some information. That sort of challenge, I started to work that out pretty quickly, and I always used the issue of the integrity of the Parliament as being my guiding light when it came to anything of a procedural nature. So, whenever the bells rang on that, I sort of would always stick to the fact that if people want to debate things more, they should be able to. If, you know, that I suppose there's a range of things, but they all stand for the integrity of the Parliament. And to me, and maybe it's my legal background, that's really important to me. And the other thing is, you know, what's the right thing to do here? And, you know, sometimes that can really be the biggest challenge of all, because what I think is right isn't always going to be what other people think is right. And there's probably one of the, you know, most outstanding parts of that at the moment is this state of emergency legislation in Victoria. Every other state has these sort of emergency powers in existence all the time and don't go back to Parliament at all. But in Victoria, we have an act where you have to go back to Parliament, and so it becomes a really hot political issue all the time. And people like me, people like Fiona Patten, you know, absolutely deluged with emails and really awful stuff that you have to listen to. And within an hour of my voting, the National Party had sent out a text to everyone in my electorate telling them how I'd voted and totally misconstruing what I'd done. And then the Liberal members, similarly, you know, a fairly negative campaign following on from that. So you have to have resilience and you have to be strong. And I've heard fear and hope talked about in quite a few of the sessions. And I do live with fear a lot of the time, fear that I'm making the wrong decision, those sorts of things that could bring you undone. So it's that strength that you need, and having people around you. I have a husband who's very supportive, thank goodness, and I have a team that I work with who really support me and keep me going, and that has been amazing. But I would say that you know, what independents do is they really challenge the business models of the parties. And we are disruptors, and we have disrupted them, and they are coming to get us. I know Ali Cupper is under attack in Mildura. I'm feeling it a bit here at times too. The lessons are, and I've only got a little bit of time left, so the big lesson for me, I think, is I couldn't have done it any differently when I did it. But if I was doing it again, I think this notion of the Indi way, of having a voices for, having that sort of support behind you and around you is really important. And I would really encourage everyone who's here today to try and build those networks and those supports around you before you do it. Don't be a loner. Don't try and do it in the short term. There's time now to prepare and do what needs to be done. And I'd really urge people to really think about how they go about it, what they need around them, and then continue to bring in the supports. And thank you to Kathy and Helen for all the support they give me when I call them. And you too, Alana. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I am unmuted. Thank you. Sorry about that, Susanna. And thank you for sharing all of that with us. I know you've had a harrowing little recent time in Parliament, and it must take its toll on you. And I think probably generally in the public, we don't see what it requires to keep fronting up all the time, knowing that what you're going to confront is so challenging. And so you have our admiration. And somebody made the comment in one of my sessions before, isn't it wonderful to start using the language of you are in an honourable position and we should treat it that way. Our members of Parliament should be honourable, and you are one of them. So thank you.
Thank you.
So let's, we'll save questions for the time, Susanna, and I'm going to go to Rebecca if she's on board here, and we've unmuted her. Are you there, Rebecca?
Can you hear me now?
There we go, yes.
There we go.
Hello, Rebecca, and welcome, and tell us where you're coming to us from.
Certainly. Well, I'm coming from my dining room. I'm in Mayo, so that's the Adelaide Hills, Fleurieu and Kangaroo Island federal seat. So in South Australia, We're the place that grows, we're the food bowl really for South Australia, dairies and fruit, and in many ways a lot like Indi, I think. And I've been a Member of Parliament since 2016.
Sorry, we're just having it's a little bit slow at this end, Rebecca. And so can you tell us about how you would address the question, why bother? What difference does it make to have independence in our parliamentary system?
Sure. Well, why bother? Because you can do an enormous amount of good. I was really fortunate to be elected back in 2016, but I guess that much of my story, you know, listening to Susanna, I was just ticking off thinking, yes, that's exactly right. Yes, it's exactly right there. It's probably some common experiences for many people who decide to run and who are elected and are not from the major parties. So we sort of backtrack to 2013. We had an Abbott government elected. At the time, I was in a national role in the youth sector. And I very much felt that the 2014 budget was very much a war on young people. And I was really angry because if you go back and remember that time, they wanted to do 6 months on, 6 months off youth allowance. And I knew for young people, the program I was the executive officer for was called Youth Connections. It worked with about 30,000 of the most vulnerable young people across Australia. Around 1 in 5 young people were Aboriginal, and it was a really good program. But along with everything else that they wanted to cut, the government decided to cut that program. And my frustration was not that they were going, you know, the programs end, I get that, but they had no desire to do anything else for young people. And so I thought, well, I'm going to start knocking on some doors and talk to some members of parliament. I actually did work as an advisor for about 6 years to a state member of parliament here. So I had a really good understanding of politics, and I also had a degree in Australian politics and international relations. So going back to 2014, I thought I'm going to start knocking on doors, and I went and visited every member of parliament I could with the local Youth Connections provider, whether it was Bronwyn Bishop or Ken Wyatt, or indeed Nick Xenophon here in South Australia. I also tried to visit my own member of parliament, and his name is Jamie Briggs, and for 9 months I was unable to get an appointment, which sort of elevated those levels of frustration. When I met with Nick Xenophon, he was wonderful in the sense that he wasn't just there to sort of nod and go, oh, okay, well, right, well, you know, that's a terrible thing. He actually managed to get me in front of the Senate Select Committee with respect to that budget, and we were able to really get the story out in the media on 7:30 Report and a number of other places about how decisions affect young people. Then Nick said to me, I think it'd be really great. Where do you live? And I said, look, I live in a wonderful place in the Adelaide Hills, but we are a safe blue ribbon seat. We've been that way since Parliament began, and I'd really lost hope with respect to the kind of representation I had. Anyway, Nick said, I think you can do it. I think you should run. And initially I thought he was completely bonkers, but something must have clicked in my mind because I decided to put a second mortgage on the house, quit my job and start knocking on doors. And I was really fortunate that the community was willing to take a chance and elect me. I think, you know, there were a lot of reasons for why I was elected back in 2016. I think one of the first reasons was that back in 1998, John Schumann, many of you would know him from the band Red Gum, he ran for the Democrats in Mayo and nearly won. And I think a lot of people in the community have often thought, oh, what if? Wouldn't that be exciting to have somebody that actually truly represents us with authenticity and doesn't just vote with whatever their party says? So that, I think, coupled with running under Nick Xenophon's banner and really just wanting to make good change in our community, wanting to make us matter. Since 2016, I worked on the hashtag Make Mayo Matter, and that's what we've done. We have been able to, in the last 5 years, really change the style of representation, and I don't think that there would be a member in the parliament that doesn't know where Mayo is. Much like Susanna, we've been able to get a lot of resources into the electorate. We were so neglected, as safe seats are on both sides of the parliament. And my focus has very much been around health, because we know in regional Australia, this is a regional electorate, that health outcomes, educational outcomes are far poorer for regional people, and slowly but surely we've been making serious change in that respect. So that's why you do it. You do it because you can, and you do it because you should, and you can make real fundamental change with respect to how your community is represented in the parliament and in the community. And it's just been, it's really exciting. Many of the challenges that Susanna mentioned, I agree with wholeheartedly. You do need to have a position on every piece of legislation, and not everybody's going to agree with you. I always come to it from a position of evidence base. So what's the evidence for this? And so it could take time. I'm really fortunate that while Nick's no longer in the parliament, he decided he was going to have a run listening to running the state parliament. He was unfortunately unsuccessful in that, but I've been re-elected. I actually I've gone through 3 elections now. Andrew Wilkie always teases me about this. He thinks I've gone through 5. But you also need to have the ride of the height of a rhino, because it can be very difficult, and people can use social media in a way that can really throw you off your work, and you can become quite distracted by it. And you need to, I think, constantly be out in your community, really, I guess, as a barometer, just constantly checking the temperature. Did I do right in this area? We still working on health as our key issues, and the environment as our key issues in our community, and what more can I do? So I'm always, I guess, going out to the community and really, constantly checking in. I mean, that's my job. I always say, I go to schools, I actually have created a lesson plan, one for primary school, one for high school. And one of the most important things you can do is as a member of parliament, is to recognise and constantly remember that I'm there as the member for Mayo. I'm not there as Rebecca Sharkey, and I'm taking with me 150,000 people that live in my community, and I'm trying to authentically represent our collective position.
Yeah, that's a very powerful statement you've just made there, Rebecca. Before we let you go, I'm interested for people to understand, and for me to understand better also, the Centre Alliance and how all that works. This convention has been named a convention for community-minded independence, which encompasses you. But we probably need to understand why you have a party called the Centre Alliance and how that fits with the other independents on the crossbench.
Sure. Well, we were originally called the Nick Xenophontaine, and Nick hated that name. He wanted to change it to Not As Bad As Anyone Else Party, and we just didn't think that would work. So we sort of tried to come up with a name that really said, look, we sit in the centre of politics. We're an alliance. We're now an alliance of 2 people, Senator Sterling Griff and myself, and we just look at every piece of legislation on its merits, and we are purely there. Really, our focus is always South Australia. Me, it's Mayo first, then it's South Australia, and Sterling is about South Australia. I sit on the crossbench. The crossbench is really broad from a, I guess you could say, a political philosophy point of view. You've got on what some would consider the far left on the spectrum, you know, Adam Bant, and then you've got Bob Catter on the other side. But what we do, the six of us, I say six because I know Craig Kelly's on the crossbench now, but he's not really, you know, he's not voting as well, from what I can see, based on his own work and looking at the legislation before us. That's what all six members do, and I think all six members front of mind every day they walk in there. It's about their community, and Sterling and I have a relationship and an understanding that I will not vote for anything that I don't believe is good for Mayo. I'm a firm believer if it's good for Mayo, it's good for South Australia, and if it's good for South Australia, it's good for the nation. So we're very flexible. We allow each other, you know, the ability to vote separately on any piece of legislation, but we try really hard to come up with a consensus together, and we rely on each other. But I also rely very much on the other members of the crossbench. We share information with each other, particularly, you know, a lot of bills can be incredibly complex, and Sterling and I have divided the portfolios among the two of us. So I sort of dive deep into some areas and he does the other. So I'm always very happy to share that information with other members of the crossbench.
Yeah, terrific. That's a very interesting insight. Thank you, Rebecca, and
Pleasure.
stay there with us because we're going to hear from Zali now and then we'll be back to you.
Zali, the superstar.
So welcome, Zali. You've been able to join us, and someone will take you off mute now, and we'll see you.
I think I am.
There you go. And welcome, and we're so pleased you made it.
Oh, I did. I wouldn't miss it for anything. It's it is the juggle though, and you know, my mum duties had to take a bit of precedence first thing this morning of watching my son go out and row, but I was all set up. If I could start by acknowledging elders past, present and emerging of the land on which I meet, but on which all around Australia so many of you are meeting on as well, because I do believe it is all together that we can, I think, build a better Australia and actually improve on a lot of things. My journey's been fascinating, and I've had a lot of amazing experiences in my life, so I do feel incredibly privileged. For us, I guess Warringah was, like Rebecca said, an incredibly safe blue ribbon seat, has always been held Liberal, had been held by Tony Abbott for 25 years. But at state elections, the area of Manly has had independent representation, and we have independent mayors. So it's not that there isn't an appetite for independent politics, it's just I think it had been opportunity. I guess over the years, maybe our previous members' politics were starting to disconnect with the local community, and it was more and more about his personal politics and less about the community's politics. And that really came to the fore, I would say, at the 2016 election. We had a strong vote for, ironically, a Nick Xenophon candidate and James Matheson, an independent. And that was already a really decent chunk out of the vote. So it was really telling that that appetite was there for independent. We then had the same-sex marriage plebiscite, the turmoil in the coalition with the leadership spill with Malcolm Turnbull, and that was really unsettling locally. People really didn't feel that that was the kind of politics, and that didn't really represent the views locally. And the big issues are being prepared for the future, especially when it came to certain challenges like climate change. So, and obviously a previous member was very fixed in his ways, in his views, and quite dismissive of local groups and local communities. So what we had was more and more since 2016, groups building and bubbling away in the community. We had a Voices of Warringah, we had Vote Tony Out, we had a number of groups bubbling away, really encouraging the community to have a conversation and think about how they wanted to be represented. So we got to, it got to late 2018 before the 2019 election, and there was a lot of speculation around independence groups working together to find a candidate, to put a candidate forward. The problem in a lot of elections is too many independents divide up the vote, and everyone is very well meaning and goes into it with good intentions, but it's very counterproductive. So there was a strong intent in Warringah that we not have a really piecemeal approach of too many candidates, which becomes a crazy situation. I had seen the by-election win of Kerryn Phelps in Wentworth and had been really motivated and spurred to see that a very traditional Liberal seat could absolutely go independent with the right support and the right kind of groundswell from the community. So I got to late 2018, early 2019. I was aware of the groundswell of movement that was there. I felt really strongly that we needed another choice. We didn't have any clear options in Warringah, and I was very unhappy with the idea that it was again going to be Tony Abbott for yet another term. So as a barrister, as a previous sports person, I very much felt that I had the tools and certainly was prepared to put it on the line to offer that opportunity. We had an amazing campaign. 2019, we started early. We started in January. We were organised, and I think that was really key for me, was a campaign that was a professional campaign. This was not a do it, on the smell of an oily rag kind of, this was, your shop front is your website. So a lot of work went into making sure we had a very good website, very clear on the issues, put a lot of work into developing policy because you're building everything from scratch. Very strong on PR and communications. You have to get your message out. And if you're not in a major party, then you've got to get yourself into the media. Obviously, the challenge with Tony at the 2019 was very high profile because I think the nature of an ex-prime minister to an independent, probably my sporting background, the whole male-female thing, we both participated in sporting events, it was on. But it was really important that we stay really tight and we run our race. So for us, we had a 3 Ps policy: be polite, prepared and positive. Don't get dragged down into a negative debate, which is what the Liberals and the campaign really wanted to do. Be focused on our message, our colours, our turquoise was incredibly positive and fresh, and all the messaging needed to be that way. All the volunteers had to sign a code of conduct and stay positive, not allowed to enter into an argument with someone that disagreed. You had to stay on message. So I felt we were really disciplined about keeping it the way it needed to be done. And it was 5 months. It was incredibly long. People giving up, the group of volunteers were amazing in really putting in so much effort for 4.5 months. I mean, this was a long time, really long pre-poll period as well. But we had something like 1,400 volunteers for a first turnout, and people had fun, which was the best feedback I had, was that people who had never been involved in a political campaign before had fun. So you get to the election and there's the hype of winning, but then the real challenge starts is the next thing, because what people don't realise is you don't get handed an operational manual and this is how you do it. You get handed the keys to an empty office. They've shredded every file. It's been a scorched earth and you have to start from scratch. I was incredibly lucky that Rebecca was very helpful in helping, and Helen Haynes, because she had some info from Kathy, but about how do you set up your office, what roles do you do, what staff, what are your priorities, how do you do this? And we very gradually built this up, and we've worked on establishing an operations manual so that we're really clear about the roles we have in the team and who does what and how we deliver. But it could be incredibly daunting if, for example, you run as an independent, get in, and then are abandoned. Like, you need that ongoing support. So the groups are incredibly important. You might think once you're elected, the job is done, but that's you're only on the start line, because then you've got to deliver the job. The next part is the most important part. So I still have a team of 12 plus a very big team of volunteers that engage and help me at the office. My entire staff is a local team, so everyone is from Warringah. So in my team, it means that we're not here for an ideology or committed to an ambition of wanting to be promoted. Everyone in the team is there because they want to deliver the best they can for our local area. And that means everyone's very dedicated and committed, which I think is really important. The best thing I've found in getting to Parliament has actually been working with my crossbench colleagues, but especially Helen and Rebecca, I have to say, because collaboration is really important. You could feel you're quite lonely, but because we are all there, we are, I would say, we have a very collaborative approach. We have similar approaches to how we look at legislation. So that is it good law? What's the ethics? What feedback have we had from the community? What submissions have been made by groups like the Law Council or BCA? And I really look to those submissions of external groups. I always put it out to the community what their views are on issues. And it's been amazing. We always publish a few days before Parliament is due to sit the list of bills that are due to be debated, and people are amazed that that information is available and that they can give some feedback on it, and that's really important. As an independent, I very much agree with Rebecca. I am one of 105,000 votes in Warringah. I am one constituent. I'm there to represent what is put to me through all our channels, which is really important. It's interesting, the whole thing about, social media and feedback and how independents get viewed. People often think as an independent, like, am I meant to be I'm not the opposition. I'm there to work with both sides of government. And it's really interesting on social media. People get really worked up about, withdraw supply and all these things. But what I feel I am here to do is represent the views of Warringah. They want me to vote on legislation on merit, on proper assessment, in accordance with how the majority are giving us that feedback. My job is not to, do stunts or oppose out of opposition's sake. My job is to work with government. And a lot of people don't realise what independents can do. So we can request to meet with the ministers, get briefings all the time on legislation, talk to the opposition and government about legislation, get the views of groups, really pull it together. A lot more than what a backbencher in a party can do. They are expected to just get the information from the party room. They don't get to go and meet with the minister to specifically discuss how it will impact their electorate. So as an independent, we're incredibly more powerful and have a lot more flexibility in what we can do. And obviously, each issue is on its merits. We're not tied to a party line, and we can really be true to that. So it's really important. Checking in with the community is incredibly important. So forums has been, and through COVID, it's meant doing a lot of things online, which is not always the best way, but it also has allowed us to reach a lot further. But lastly, I think be really clear about your goals, and that's maybe the ex-athlete in me. I'm a very result-focused person, so whenever I have meetings with constituents or companies or organisations bringing something to me, I'm very focused on, but what do you want me to do? Like, as in, I'm hearing you, I'm listening, and I can represent it, but what is the solution? How do we fix this? How do we move it forward? What can be done about it? And in the same way, for me, it was really important to have a clear policy agenda. So you can't, as an independent, pick every issue under the sun, but you have to have your clear areas where you want to make a difference. And I do feel that as an independent and on the crossbench, we're really moving the conversation. So for me, obviously, the Climate Act, introducing the climate bill to show that there is a sensible way forward on an issue that has been incredibly divisive for 10 years, mainly because of my predecessor. Integrity, we need an integrity commission. So to continually be pushing for more accountability. And obviously with the events of the last 2 weeks in Parliament, there's real questions around the workplace and safety of Parliament. And we need to pull back the curtain on Canberra. This can't be a place that is devoid of the rules and processes that happens everywhere else in Australia. So why do it? I would say, why not do it? Of course, everyone should do it. There's no point in being a passenger, sitting on the sidelines and railing against the situation. You have to just be prepared to step up and weigh in on the issues. And whether that's running as an independent, supporting independence, local government, state government, federal government, go and be an advisor, be a chief of staff, you know, go and work, try and get high up in the departments. You know, you have to get involved. At the end of the day, that's what got me off the bench, I guess. I'd had 10 years as a barrister and getting more and more frustrated. And I felt like, you know, there's only one way of changing the system, and that's by getting into it. So that's my just over 10-minute take on why to do it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Zali. I'm going to bring Susanna and Rebecca back into the conversation now, and probably start at a very obvious point as we look at the three of you on this panel and say, well, all women, what does that mean? So let's talk about gender for a little while. So we've had some discussions in our conversations here in Indi that the sort of party pipeline that's available for people to put themselves forward and potentially become a candidate in their electorate is probably not particularly women friendly. It makes lots of requirements of women, the party pipeline, that they need to, hoops that they need to go through to get there. And we're also getting a pretty clear picture that the experience of women in Parliament is not necessarily one that you would just step forward and choose very easily. The fact that you have all chosen to be independents and that you're all women, tell us a bit about how gender plays out, why independence, why perhaps being independents is more attractive to women. Do you have some comments about women in our parliamentary system? So Zali, you're on the front
Okay,
camera at the moment. You want to go first?
Sure. Look, for me, being independent was really important because I felt that I didn't want to have to compromise, you know, have deals that were done behind the scenes that the community wouldn't be aware of. And I feel that that does happen in the major parties. And the best way I can relate it is, as a barrister, you're an officer of the court, no matter, and so you're retained by your client and you do the best you can in court. But at the end of the day, you can never mislead the court. You are an officer of the court first and foremost. And I feel there's a real conflict of duty for a lot of MPs, especially in the major parties, where who comes first? And there's no code of ethics. There's no, you know, professional practice code for MPs or senators, which is incredibly lacking. And Helen has put forward and I've seconded. But for me, I wanted to be very sure that my duty was to the Parliament and to the people of Warringah, that there was no intermediary in that. And that was what was really important.
Yep. Susanna, tell us about your experience in the Victorian Parliament.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of what Zali says is so true in terms of the unattractiveness of the parties to me. I'd never been a member of a political party, and I'd probably always say I'd been a swinging voter. So the parties held no attraction to me, but being in a safe seat that had been the same for so long and largely under-attended to, made it really important for me to step forward. I think also, you know, I agree with Zali in that the parties are not attractive places for women. And even though our Labor Party in Victoria are almost 50% women, which makes the Parliament a much nicer place. It's like when you get a whole lot of women on boards that were only once men, you really see a change happening. And I'd been on the RACV board for a number of years, and as more women came on, the nature of the place changed, and I think we bring something very different, generally a lot more tolerance and thoughtfulness and less aggression that is often played out in Parliament, although, you know, I look at some of the women in the parties in Parliament and I think to myself, that's just not you. You don't really want to do that. And I sort of feel sorry for them in a way, because you know that they're really nice people, but the party is telling them that you must behave like this and you must lay it on and you must be almost, well, aggressive, if not abusive sometimes. So, I mean, that was simply not for me, and I don't play that role. And I just try to take a really considered and thoughtful approach to what I do. And I suppose respect is what I want, and respect is what I, you know, endeavour to give in the processes. But there's no doubt gender, it's, you know, I mean, on the opposition side in the Victorian Parliament, there's very few women, and on the other side, it's about 50% or close to. So it's a very different sort of place. But I can certainly tell that the more women that come in, the more friendly it is to women who are coming in. So, you know, there's a sense that Parliament is now embracing the fact that women can be there, and it's more comfortable because of that.
Yeah. And so, Rebecca, I'm going to turn to you. One of the questions that came through on the chat line was about having a thick skin and how you develop it. You've needed one. Did you have it to start with? How has it thickened up over time? And how do you handle, particularly as a woman, some of the things that happened in Parliament?
Sure. Well, I might just go back to the previous question first and just say, because my experience is a little bit different, because I did work in one of the parties. I worked for the Liberal Party for about 6 years, and I actually worked for a woman in that party. And she suggested that I put my name forward within the party and look to get pre-selection for a state seat, actually. And it was actually another woman within the party infrastructure who told me, at the time I was a single parent, and who told me that basically I didn't really have the right credentials because, you know, you're a single parent after all. So I think sometimes in some of the parties, and I'm probably maybe more talking about maybe historically, I'd like to think historically in the Liberal Party, I don't think women who were in there necessarily supported other women as well. With respect to developing a thick skin, I think it just happens over time. Sometimes you get, you know, really hurt by things. I was actually talking to a senior female journalist who mentioned that she deleted the Twitter app off her phone. I've done the same thing. I find Twitter is probably the worst, because the pieces of legislation that we work on are really, really complex, and many of them are. And the 30-second news grab, if you're lucky that it's a 30-second news grab on a particular piece that maybe goes through the Parliament, doesn't give a good perspective on the whole story of the bill, either the good or the bad. And I just find that the polarisation and really the tribalism that has happened across not just the Parliament, but I think, you know, the broader mainstream Australia is sometimes challenging to deal with. You know, for instance, in one day I can be called everything from liberal light to a greenie. You know, so the labelling is really hard, but the best way for me to manage that and to I guess build that resilience is to just always be out in my community. My community knows me, and I have enormous faith in them that they'll tell me exactly you know what they're thinking and how they want me to represent them.
Yes,
Can I jump in? I just think it's really interesting. There is a lot of critics, and there's always a lot of armchair critics, and that whole idea of where do you position an independent is a really interesting piece, because we've had some very high profile, slightly different independents over the journey of Parliament. And that tends to polarise people's view of, you know, especially when you're trying to change an electorate that has traditionally been always one way, they need to be reassured that this is a safe pair of hands, that this is a trusted representative. And in a lot of electorates, when they turn to the brand of the party, they do that because they kind of trust the brand of the party, regardless who the MP is. And that's why you have some seats where they will be able to fly in a candidate that has very low profile in the seat, but the brand of the party is well established, and that gets them over the line. And I'm always amazed at how little work the individual MP has to actually do to justify themselves to the electorate. But in contrast, an independent has to really establish where you are, and for people to really trust that you are going to represent them. You're not going to go maverick on them. And I think that's the most important thing. And our role as the crossbench is to reassure that of what does being independent offer? And so you have to have a thick skin to the critiques, but I think transparency is a really big answer to that. So we put a lot of work into our website, having my voting record properly explained, because you can twist and turn numbers any way you want. And I know my opposition are doing that pretty regularly. You know, you can take, you know, very out of context grabs and do screens and advertising and, you know, really negative stuff. But if you really focus on explaining your decision, everyone won't agree with every decision you make. That's normal, that's democracy. But if you can at least explain the process by which you got there, people will respect that you've genuinely done your best to come to that decision and how you've voted on something. So thick skin, I know it's hard. But this is where the collaboration of Parliament and even the party MPs, you know, if some of the backbenchers of the major parties are having a tough time, we can tell, and we are supportive of one another. I would say, especially amongst some of the women. I know there are some really good people there that are sometimes in tough spots, and so there is a little more collaboration than what might appear from the outside.
While we're on this theme of collaboration, which you've already mentioned, Zali, and I'll ask you and Rebecca this question and then come to a different question for Susanna, but there is a lot of talk about that in this environment of collaboration and the way you speak about it on the crossbench and how much you gather together, and we see you in the public media together, people are asking, isn't the independence just the emergence of a new political party? You know, what's the difference?
Yeah, well, no, because I think we do it. We have no influence on each other's votes. About the only area where I think we're all consistently together in the federal parliament is in respect to gag orders, where we all agree that the parliament is a place of debate, and so the government, or using its numbers to shut down debate, is not the spirit of the place. So we generally always vote against that. But then when it comes to substantive legislation, we all have to represent our electorates, and there are very different sways and different priorities in each electorate. You know, Helen and Rebecca are much more regional than for me in Warringah. So we have very different views on different things. I think we're probably united around integrity and transparency. But no, it's not. You can work with other people, you can exchange ideas, discuss things, but it's not at all a party in that sense, because we are very much all have our very autonomous operations.
Right, good. So Rebecca.
I think one thing that all of the people on the crossbench do is they build relationships across the parliament. And, you know, Zali said it earlier, we're not in opposition. We're there purely to represent our community on every piece of legislation, on the merits of that legislation for our community. So I've worked with, say, Ed Husick, who's very passionate about payday lenders, and I've also worked with George Christensen, who, because of his electorate being a regional electorate, having a lot of cyclones, are very passionate about how we get better telecommunications in our communities. So you just sort of work across the parliament, you listen to other people, you work out what are the things that have driven them to come to parliament, and then I just see it, you know, as a way to you get your best work done outside of the chamber and the relationships you build.
Yeah, terrific. So Susanna, I'm going to come to you with another theme that's coming through in our questions, and Zali and Rebecca might comment on this too after you, but we've had a couple of questions that go like, how do you know what's right in your seat when there are polarised views on a topic, and have you had to vote against your own personal preference because your community wants something else of you? Tell us how you manage as an independent that whole issue.
There have been some controversial, issues arise, and it does get very hard. But I talk to a lot of people in my community about them, and I think probably like Rebecca says, I look at the evidence for something too. I want to operate from an evidence base in most of what I do. I get briefed by everyone, in Parliament who is there for me as a resource, but also then groups in the community who I hear from, and some of them will be telling me to vote against it, and others will be saying, no, it's the right thing to do. Sometimes it comes down to me thinking, well, what's the right thing to do here? And yes, this whole constituency has put their trust in me. They did it because they thought and hoped I would do the right thing, because I've been here for a long time, and there's sort of a sense that I have a space in this community too. I hope they accept that I always won't, I may not always get it right, but I do what I think is right, and that sort of really guides me through it. I also at times will take the view that, the current government in Victoria was overwhelmingly elected by the people of Victoria. And very often, that can be a bit of a guider in terms of what people will generally think, even though we're not a Labor electorate and probably haven't ever been and may not be for who knows whether that will ever happen. But I think there are some things where it's pretty clear that just overall it's the accepted and the right thing to do as well.
Zali and Rebecca, either of you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, like Suzanne said, you just gather as much evidence as you can. When I was first elected, and I've done it every year except last year because of COVID, I went out to the community and ran community workshops. That was after gathering from thousands of people across the community a survey on what they cared about and what they didn't care about. And then I've gone into the community basically with butcher's paper and said, okay, you care about the environment. What does that mean? You care about policies around refugees. What does that look like? So I've managed to sort of take that, I guess you could say, as a blueprint, and then always reconnecting again with the community to make sure that where I'm sitting on things is a good example for us. Often though, the more evidence you gather and then sharing that out into the community, people can, soften their position or change their position on issues too. So it's a constant piece of work. It's a constant piece of work. But the other thing I do is I, unlike a lot of MPs, the general email address, I monitor that. I'm a bit of a cyborg. So it can, sometimes there'll be thousands in a day, but it gives me a very good, and they're not, sometimes you'll get campaign emails and you have to manage those, but it always gives me a really good indication of what the community is thinking about, particularly if we're in Canberra for weeks on end and I can't physically get out into the community.
Yep. Zali, I know this is a very important topic to you, the relationship you have with your constituents. Do you have anything that you want to add on this question?
No, yeah, it is a really interesting one. So obviously for me, starting from scratch, it was really important to to be very clear about my platform for the election. So I had some amazing people volunteer their time to develop our policy across some key areas, and around, really getting a sense of what were the issues that mattered to Warringah. Post-election, I wanted to be sure. So one of the very first things we did was a very big community survey, and we had over 5,000 responses, which when you put it in context of just post an election and people don't really want to do political surveys, it was a really high engagement, and that gave us a really good sense of priorities and where people were with issues. And then we've taken those issues and dug deeper. So if transport and congestion is a problem for us, being an urban electorate, we have some, and because we've been a safe seat for 25 years or longer, but essentially under one member for 25 years, we've had very little change to our traffic and infrastructure. A lot of promises. Every time an election came around, there were promises about it, but nothing was ever done. So it was really important for me after that first big survey was to dig deeper under some of the issues about, okay, well, what does that, like what Rebecca said, what does that look like? How do we do it? What are the solutions people want or don't want? Obviously, COVID has meant we haven't been able to be in the with people one-on-one as much, but we had already managed to have 3-4 community forums before COVID locked us down last year, 2019 to 2020. So very much delivering on that. The key is from monitoring emails, phone calls into the office, putting the question out there on social media. We have a newsletter every fortnight. We have a minimum of 4 printed 4 pages that go out to the community asking for feedback. So it's constantly touching back with the community to have that sense. If you're off track, I think really quickly, because the emails come in and the calls come in. And so that is the barometer of how we're doing. There's a system called Voter ID that you use to help manage your emails and everything that comes in, because there are thousands and thousands of emails. And that can give us really good tracking on the issues, on what matters, and allows us to go out and communicate to people. So I know one of the questions I saw earlier on your chat was, is running as an independent and running an independent office a bit like starting a business? Absolutely. We are a customer service business. We are there to serve the electorate. There's no greater focus than that. As federal politics, everyone gets a little bit confused between local government, state government and federal government jurisdictions and what we all do. But you really are, you've got to look at it on the local level of what you're doing for your community and your electorate, and then how that gets translated to your national politics and on the federal, on your national scene. So I always talk about that we take a bit of Warringah to Canberra, and we need to make sure we pull back the curtain on Canberra so Warringah knows what's happening down there. And yeah, there's no, I think again, there's been some issues that are contentious, but whenever you get a lot of the sort of, outcry on social media, it's often not people in the electorate. It's often people that are from the outside making it an uninformed commentary.
Yeah. So as you speak about being a customer-focused business, there's been quite a few questions that have come through about funding and finances. So let's have a talk about that. People saying, in marginal seats where there isn't a lot of activity happening, how do you possibly get the funds together that you're required for campaigning? So I'm going to ask the three of you to give us a bit of an insight on how that's been part of your business plan, and how you've generated the funds that you've required to fund your campaigns.
I'll go first here. I'm a bit of a cheapskate. I really don't like asking people for donations. I'm really bad at it, so I don't do it. I run a campaign probably $80,000 or less. I think the first time, probably would have been not much more than 20,000, but it costs nothing to door knock. I have a big rural electorate, so I door knocked in lots of the towns. I still door knock now. I'm really looking forward to, now that we have a couple of weeks break and then we've got a 6-week break. I love door knocking. I think it's the most powerful thing that you can do, and it costs nothing. I can't think of a single campaign where I had enough money to do a full-on flyer, political flyer. Like Zali, I do several newsletters a year, and we do e-newsletters every fortnight, and I have always felt that I was campaigning from the 3rd of July 2016 and have just never stopped. But I don't think you need a huge amount of funds to run a campaign. Others might disagree, but I think the best thing you can do is knock on doors, turn up to everything. And if you're rural, you're probably pretty well known in your community anyway, and that counts for a lot.
So thanks, Rebecca. Susanna, in your first campaign, as you said already, it was short, sharp and focused, and it had a big media presence and required funding. So tell us what happened back then in your area.
Well, I put up the first amount of about $10,000, and I asked other people to ask other people for me. So it is, I'm like Rebecca, it just feels really hard to ask for money for yourself. But ultimately, if you're going to run a campaign, you need a fair bit of money. And in that campaign, I think we raised, it was from $10 to the man who came through the campaign door and gave it to us. And, we would have receipted money from so many different people, but we got a few bigger ones from people who had been sitting on the sidelines for years just waiting for someone to put up their hand and do this. And I suspect that will happen in a lot of places going forward too, because you do need that bigger amount, I think, in your first campaign. The second time around, I don't think you need as much, probably, if things are moving along and you're delivering and people have got to know you. But in Victoria now, the rules have changed dramatically in terms of election campaigns, and they're publicly funded, and there's limits to the amount that people can donate. And of course, it has to be disclosed, anyone who donates to you over $1,000. So that will make a big change in the next election round. But I just can't imagine running for a federal seat without a lot more than I had for my first election. And it's interesting hearing Rebecca say that. So maybe I'm wrong, but I'd certainly say the more you have, the better, because it's going to enable you to really cover a lot more ground and have much more impact.
Yep. I know one of the things that we've spoken about in the community and campaigning streams earlier on today is that fundraising can actually be fun also. And in Indi, we've had lots and lots of fun having funding events, and that people have really enjoyed participating in. So certainly that's not to be overlooked. I think the idea of bringing fun and art and creativity back into our campaigns, where people actually enjoy campaigning, there's a lot going for that. So Zali, tell us about your fundraising and campaigning in Warringah.
Yeah, look, I guess probably slightly different to everyone else's experience. We were fairly conscious that it was going to take a very concerted effort to be able to beat the previous member. Obviously, he had a lot of support, and we were able to, we did have a really big, I guess we combined our fundraising efforts with community engagement. So I had a lot of events that assisted in fundraising, but were also about discussing the issues. So meeting people within the community, a lot of events with, 20, 30 people, where people had that opportunity to really discuss the issues, meet me one-on-one, really get the sense of, was I going to be a safe pair of hands? So that was really what the key part. And so that was a huge part. Had a huge amount of, obviously, profile, so that brought a lot of donations. Again, I think, and one of your questions was actually, because it is like starting a business, your shop front is your website. It has to be really good. And look, maybe my athlete days again, as a professional athlete, you can't win as an amateur. You have to get the right coaches. You have to have the right team with you to have a chance to win. You're not going to be competitive without the right advice. So I am still an advocate that as much as you need that community support, you need to make sure you have the right professional skills around you. So you need the right people building your website, making sure your communications is clear, that people can hear your message. People are really busy, especially in an electorate like Warringah. They've got really busy lives. People are working, running around, you've got kids, everything's happening. If you want them to really receive your message, it has to be really clear and really well delivered. And that requires professional skills. And it would be arrogant to think that we all have the skills to deliver every part of the job to be successful. So I do, if you can afford to do it, turn to professionals for their skills. That's why they're good at what they do. So I did feel that that's where I was lucky enough that we had that level of support in the electorate. We did have a lot of people make donations. We certainly started with a much smaller budget than what we ended up with. It was a long campaign. It was 5 months. So 5 months renting an office, employing some staff for that key advice that's necessary. And, just even on how many T-shirts we had to buy for volunteers and core flutes and all that kind of material. is essential. And I was incredibly lucky that a lot of people got behind the campaign in that way. And I do think it's really important. I'm not good at the money conversation either, but I have people helping me that are better at it than me, luckily. But again, that's where, as independents are, you know, a member or a senator, or, you know, you are maybe at the forefront at doing the, you know, the public aspect of it, but you're one of a team. There's a lot of people putting that effort and supporting you. And for me, that's really, you know, that's how you deliver. That's how you can do it. So it is really important at that way. Is I think, you know, the door knocking is great, but it's even better when you can, if every time you can speak to 30 people in one go instead of just one person, then it's even better. So you've got to maximize your time and try and get to as many people as possible. What we found in Warringah is we had a huge number of people prepared to put corflutes in their front yard, on their garden. You know, this wasn't a matter of corflutes on public streets and on fencing where it's a bit of a fight for who gets in there. You know, the parties, we had, you know, public streets where it was party stuff all over it, but it was individual householders prepared to show their colours and, you know, really stand up. And it was lovely. I had so many kids when I visited schools who said, oh, I've had your photo in the front yard. So it was really lovely, that level of the, you know, I felt the community was with me. And that's why all the rubbish that came out, you know, the nasty campaigns and the stuff that's really negative, it really was water off a duck's back, because at the end of the day, I had the strength of the community with me, and that's so much more powerful.
Yeah, yeah. So Rebecca said that the door knocking approach, you know, $80,000 can get you out there and make it happen. If you're going to run a professional campaign, what sort of ballpark figure are we talking, Zali? People are interested.
Oh, I shudder at the amount that we ended up having to spend. The only consolation I have is that I know Tony spent 2.5 times more. And that was half the problem. Was we started with sort of a certain budget, and then we had like these trucks rolling around the electorate with nasty campaigns about me. And so, you know, people within the team went, right, let's go and fundraise so we can get our own truck. And, you know, then he rented out windows for, you know, window shop fronts. And so then we had our shop fronts, and it becomes a bit of an escalating situation. So I do really support that there be caps. I think if we had caps, you know, not only political donation caps, but caps on spending, we don't want this race to crazy the way the US has and how much gets spent. So look, it's all publicly available. A horrendous amount was spent in Warringah, I hate to say, but it was to good use. But look, I think in an urban electorate, there are also costs that you probably don't have in a regional area in terms of, you know, having a premises out of which you have to operate and things like that.
I might just add, just because we didn't spend a lot doesn't mean it wasn't a professional campaign, but it was just we do a very grassroots campaign. So I'll have some wonderful women who will make scarves, and, you know, people wearing orange scarves everywhere. And we do things a little differently, I think, in the country, but we still need to have a campaign office. I've always used out the back of my accountant, because he's a wonderful person who's willing to let me use his office. But we just, you know, my mum is making lots of jams and things like that and selling those. So you're still making it a professional campaign, and you're still sharing the word. It's just that it is a grassroots way of doing it.
Yeah, so I think what we're hearing is that you have to take into account the context and the electorate that you're in. So Zali, for all those other people in urban areas who are going to run campaigns that need to be as professional as yours, if they go to your website, how much would they find there as being spent on the campaign?
Well, everything has to be declared to the AEC, so that's all transparent. And actually, I should say for everyone, independents have a much higher level of accountability than parties. Independents have to declare everything, their expenditure and their fundraise, what money they raised. I can't remember the number of weeks, but a short period of time after the election, whereas parties can wait to the February the following year and don't have to break it down per electorate. So they don't have to say what they spend in specific sports or who raises what.
Yep.
And actually, they've narrowed it down. Look, I think unfortunately you have in urban electorates, you're going to have to be in the six figures. Again, it depends. You know, there's so many variables. So you have to think if you're an incumbent, you're probably only going to need a campaign office for a shorter period of time outside of your electoral office, right? But if you're challenging an incumbent, you're going to think about clearly about what's the period of time to get you established in your community and get your message out. So that will probably mean 3 months maybe of a rental of an office if you haven't got premises available. Are you going to have a campaign manager? How are you going to do it? So I would say you are in the, you know, it's going to be a minimum of around the 200,000 to 300,000, and it keeps going up from there if you have to pay for advertising and pay for things like that.
Yes, so I've been reliably told that Josh Frydenberg spent 2.1 million in Kooyong, so we're looking at big figures.
I've
and
been
this-
told each time in Mayo it's about $1 million that the Liberal Party have spent. So.
Yep.
Alana, could I just say that in
No.
regional areas, people will often donate the shop front and the trucks and there are a lot of donations that will come out of a community where you are known that, you know, they have value, obviously, but don't forget that in our more regional areas, there's a lot of support that may not amount to just money coming across the counter. It's a lot of other valuable support that you can harness when people really want change.
Yep. So we're quickly running out of time, but one of the other questions that's coming through, Zali made a comment, I think it was you, Zali, about the what can happen when multiple independents are standing and taking the votes from each other. So people are interested in what ideas you might have for trying to manage that and helping your electorate see the advantage of having one independent that's going to attract all of those votes. So do you have some interesting experience or ideas that you want to share with other people?
Yeah, look, that came from an observation actually of Karen Phelps' by-election campaign. She had, I think the by-election had something like 16 candidates on it, which is an incredibly crowded ticket and really confusing for people. And if you have a lot, and what we do know, for example, is that there will be some sort of fake independents that get run by the parties where, you know, the Liberals, for example, might run an independent that's really a Liberal to get some votes and then that will preference. So the key is really understanding who's willing to be out there. It's certainly not about discouraging anyone to be out there. You know, the more it is good for people if they're genuinely there to represent community and views. But it is about, well, what support do they have? You know, are their views so dissimilar to others? How are you going to be most effective? They're the questions to ask. And so, because if you have a ticket with 15, you know, anything more than, I think we ended up with about 10 in Warringah. And it gets incredibly confusing, I think, for voters in terms of you've got to number the boxes and how the preference system works. So it is important to remember what your goal is. Is it a personal journey of wanting, you know, it's a personal ambition, or is it about the issues and how can you do the best you can on the issues? And so in Warringah, it was before I actually decided to run, but I'm aware that there were some other people that initially intended to run and they announced they would run. And then I announced I would run and they realized that they were aligned with me on issues and were happy to, you know, that they felt that I would take those issues forward. Again, and so I think it's really about focusing on is the goal good policy on an issue and how do you achieve that? It's not an ego trip of putting yourself out there. So I think that's maybe the main difference. And that's where I think I would encourage communities to think about it, because the way the major parties operate is divide and conquer. So divide the community up, get heaps of little groups working against one another, and then you really you damage the impact you can have. United, you can have a much greater impact. Your message can get to more people. You know, working together is much more of a threat to the major parties. So if you're trying to challenge a seat that has been held by a major party for a long time, you need to come together and, you know, work out that on core principles you're aligned, and support maybe key candidates so that you have a much better prospect. Because remembering our system, two-party preferred, you've got to be in the top 2 highest votes at the first round. You have to get over those thresholds. So you have to be strategic about, if you know, you want to succeed. And if you want to succeed, then you have to be strategic about how you do it.
Yep. Thank you. Susanna, after your success as the first independent in your seat, did more independents stand the second time? And do you see that as being something that will possibly increase next time?
Can I just say that in my first election, one other candidate who, you know, would have pulled quite a few votes very generously had a coffee with me and said she would stand aside because I was standing. And that was an incredibly thoughtful and generous step, I thought, for her to take. There's always been a few independents standing at a state level. Some of them just pull very few votes, so it probably isn't so significant. I can't say that more stood the second time at all in the state election, but it's certainly there were more at the next federal election. So I think federally it's important. But Alana, coming back to why bother, we have to bother now more than ever because the issues out there at a federal level have never been more important, with climate change and aged care and you know, integrity. These things I think are really burning at people, and you know, good on strong independents who'll have a go. And you need to choose the one you think can actually get over the line, because to have a few more there with Rebecca and Zali and Helen would be just outstanding.
I think that's probably a very good point to wind up on, Susanna. Why bother? So to all of those people who are participating today, who are here and have done the candidate stream earlier on today, and who are thinking that this might be a possible future for them, listen to Susanna, listen to that last message. Do bother, we need you. And it's been a wonderful conversation with Zali and Rebecca and Susanna. Thank you so much. You gave us such an insight, a generous insight into what your lives are like as parliamentarians, and we really very much appreciate that. So a clap to you from all of us.